All right, we're doing H.H. Holmes again today. The reason that this story is difficult for me is because, well, number one, it's old. So besides newspapers, you don't get like any good documents. Number two, H.H. Holmes is a pathological liar. Even when he's caught, he has 7 confessions that are all different. Number 3, he travels like all over the place.
Possibly
literally
across the pond.
All over the place. Mm-hmm. And number 4, you'll see in this episode, he's a swindler and he really thinks out his crimes. So it's really hard to map his movements because he thought so hard about how to mask his movements, as you'll see in this one. Okay. So it's really difficult to say, okay, Holmes was here, he did this, this, and this, because he was so good at masking it. But anyway, tonight we're going to 1316 Callow Hill Street in Philadelphia. We are doing H.H. Holmes, but like I said, you know, it's one of the reasons this story's so damn hard is because he moves all over the damn place, right? And we're not even in the murder castle yet. And that's what he's known for. You know what I'm saying?
I know.
So
believe me, we all know we're not in the murder castle yet.
So this is the place right here. 1316 Callow Hill Street in Philadelphia.
Chicago.
1316 Callow Hill Street in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
What the fuck? I told you he travels.
Got it.
We're not in Chicago. We are in Philadelphia. This is where this murder takes place. And yes, it is. This is not the murder castle. This is
another place. We're still not even at the murder castle.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
If you want just the 2-episode Murder Castle, H.H. Holmes whole story, I'm sure Morbid puts out a great 2-episode. But this is the Philadelphia address where a murder did happen. And it's kind of cool. This is definitely not the original building.
Okay.
But it is the same because it's brick. And I think back then, I'll show you a photo of it. It looked wood and it looked more like a house. This is not the original building.
But same location.
Same location. And in fact, where we're going tonight specifically happened right through this window, which is kind of cool, you know? I kind of wonder if this car service knows the history of it. September 4th, 1894, 1316 Callow Hill Street in Philadelphia. There was a sign out front that said Perry's Patent Shop. This was the apartment and office of one B.F. Perry, who was a patent seller. I guess we still have those nowadays, but his main source of income was to bring patents to market. And if someone has an idea for a patent, but they don't want to follow through, he'll buy the patent and
interesting.
And either resell it or develop the idea into a product. So that's basically, it's like he's like a shark, I guess. Anyway,
okay.
So this guy, B.F. Perry, was supposed to be there because his client, a Eugene Smith, had been in constant communication with this guy about bringing his patent to market. This guy was a carpenter. And he developed already successfully. He developed a saw. I think honestly, I really think he developed the saw with the teeth on it, like the rotary saw, because that's what it sounds like. He was the owner of E. Smith, so his name is Eugene Smith, the guy who was coming to see B.F. Perry, the E. Smith sawtooth in 1875. And he just sold another patent to this guy, and now he's going to finalize the transaction. He has walked into the shop for a couple days now. The door's been unlocked, but he has not seen Perry anywhere. Now, his apartment is upstairs, but you know, you just don't want to walk up there because maybe he's out. But it is kind of weird that the door's always unlocked. So on the third day, he goes in there and like always, he's calling out this guy's name. Perry, you in here? It's me, Eugene Smith. Nothing at all. No answer, nothing. Finally, he says, you know what? I'm just going to walk upstairs and see if everything's okay. And before he gets to the top step, he smells something. B.F. Perry was cooking banana bread, so it smelled good. I was kidding. That's not what it was. It's a dead body. It's not banana bread. Although banana bread sounds good.
No, it sounds great, actually. Maybe I should make some.
Eugene Smith walks up to the top step, and he smells that undeniable scent of a dead body rotting. Okay, some would say it's the best smell in the world. Just kidding. All right, I'm going to read this little passage from The Torture Doctor by David Frank. Quote, a terrible stench stopped them short when they entered the back room. Putrefaction had set in, and the upper part of B.F. Perry's body was especially decomposed. So he smelled this awful scent of human decay as soon as he gets upstairs. This is a newspaper illustration of this guy, Eugene Smith, who was coming to see this guy laying on the floor, B.F. Perry.
Yep.
This is how he found his body. So this is Eugene Smith, the same guy up here on the right. Now, that is really censored from what the body actually did look like. The body was in terrible condition. It has been dead for at least 2 days, and not only that, the window was open, which is probably why he couldn't smell anything wafting through downstairs, and he was positioned right in front of the window, right in front where the sun rises. So the sun has been baking this guy's dead body for 2 days, kind of like banana bread. If you think about it.
You're I'm not really into banana bread anymore.
Yeah.
But thanks for trying.
All right, can you read that newspaper article? This is from the Lincoln Weekly News, December 6th, 1894.
There, lying flat on the floor, was the body of B.F. Perry. It was on its back. The right hand was on the chest, to the left hand by the side. A corncob pipe filled with tobacco lay within reach. It had never been lighted. A bottle that had contained benzene was on the floor close by. It had been broken in two at the middle.
So tell me what you make of that. If you were this guy, what do you make of that? Like, what happened? Why is there a dead body based on what was around it?
Well, I think he was taken by surprise if the pipe was on the floor.
The sun had been baking this guy's body for several days. All right. What you read was this guy was lying on his back, right hand on his chest. There was a corncob pipe filled with tobacco that lay within reach. It had not been lit. What you will see, though, was there was a lit match. And a bottle that contained benzene was on the floor broken. Try to think of what happened if you knew that this man's face was completely scorched on one side.
What is benzene? Is that
It's a flammable.
Yeah.
So here's what the scene looks like. Laying on the floor was this guy. One side of his face was completely charred. Now his whole face is black because of decomposition. Literally baking in the sun for 2 days would do that to you. But you could definitely tell that one side was scarred. His corncob pipe, was filled with tobacco but had not been lit. There was a match that was lit and a broken bottle of benzene, which is highly flammable. Walking in upstairs, it is obvious that this man went to light his pipe while he had benzene out, didn't know it was flammable, the fumes, and the fumes ignited and blew him up. That is what the police will see as soon as they walk in there. The burns to the face and the charred body made identification of this male nearly impossible. Now, it's B.F. Perry, right? Because he owns the shop. But it's not really that simple sometimes.
Can't tell who he is.
Because you can't tell who he is. And we didn't have things like fingerprints, dental records. You'll see for this body, the dental records they used was the daughter of this man having to look at her father's teeth and saying, yeah, that's my father. That's how they did dental records. So how they would...
Not super reliable.
Not reliable at all. And for insurance purposes, it could be easily fooled, right? So they're looking for, if you have a claim out and your husband dies, they're going to go and ask neighbors how tall he was. He was 6'1". Well, if there's a man that's 5'8" sitting there, it's not the same guy. You know what I'm saying? Type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. His chest was burned except for what was covered by his arm.
From the torture doctor by Dave Frank, his tongue was swollen and stuck outside of his mouth, and red fluid issued from his mouth.
His face was black with decomposition, and Eugene Smith, who found this body, runs out down the street, and he gets the first person he sees who's a doctor who owns his own little shop down the street, a Dr. William Scott. He owned a nearby drugstore. Dr. Scott runs up to look at the body and immediately sees some inconsistencies. The bottle was shattered on the floor, but all the pieces were kind of inside the bottle. Would that be consistent with the crime scene? With an explosion, an accidental explosion?
Guess not.
Because explosions go outward. So there should have been shards all in this guy's body, and there were none. Okay, he is lighting a pipe, probably while he's holding this bottle of highly flammable liquid. It exploded, and none of the shards entered his body or even scattered on the floor. They were all just in the bottle. That's weird. Okay, so he would notice stuff like that. But you got to keep in mind, who gives a shit? The police aren't going to give a fuck. Like, there's an explosion. Move on. I got better shit to do, you know? Yeah. So, at first, Dr. Scott determined that the man wasn't killed by an explosion, but the power of the blast was so intense that Perry's bladder had burst.
The face was much mortified, indicating putrefaction. Dr. Scott later told a jury. There was considerable stench in the room. We found around the room a broken bottle and some uncorked bottles on the mantel. I went to the house expecting to find a man burned to death or blown to death by an explosion. We found the face discolored and distorted or full of pools. The inner skin and outer skin cut, cutis and cuticle separated and watery-like. That was the process of decomposition. The odor was terrible. His tongue was swollen and stuck out of his mouth, and red fluid issued from his mouth. Any little pressure on the stomach or over the chest here would have caused this fluid to flow more rapidly.
I mean, they're going way too far into this. Who cares? I mean, but if it was an explosion and someone did this to him, I mean, someone else would be harmed as well. I mean, right?
From the Philadelphia Inquirer, September 4th, 1894, the body was found in a state of rigor mortis and so badly burned in the face from chemicals and sun exposure that the identity of the person could not be judged.
All right, so now we got to figure out who this guy is, because B.F. Perry is not his name at all. And people do use aliases. I mean, shit, I'd have 4 or 5, literally.
Sign of a serial killer, but okay.
No sign that we have some stalkers. Here is the man on the floor, apparently, all right? This is what he looks like, or looked like before.
Okay.
But you couldn't really tell. Who you're looking at now is Benjamin Pitezel. That's the story we're talking about tonight.
So Benjamin Pitezel is also B.F. Perry?
Exact. Well, no, hold on a second. You can make that decision yourself. They find out this guy is a man named Benjamin Pitezel.
Okay.
Benjamin Pitezel has a wife and 5 kids. He's also an alcoholic.
Okay.
And he's friends with another man, a doctor. We'll call him Dr. Holmes.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing it. He comes into play somewhere in this, so.
Yeah, this is, let me tell you how this.
Homey. I like that one.
Let me tell you how this guy got mixed up in all this and who this really is on the floor.
Well, I think B.F. Perry is really H.H. Holmes's character. Like this is like an insurance fraud.
Okay.
So the person is actually Pitezel, but B.F. Perry was Holmes, and like Holmes is the one that's trying to get the insurance.
That's a pretty good guess.
Or like Pitezel left all of his fortune to Holmes in his will, and so he like kind of killed him off, type of thing.
Here's what we know about Pitezel. Apparently, this guy, he was using an alias. He had written about it that he was using an alias, and that's how they found it. At first, he was buried in a pauper's grave. Whatever. B.F. Perry, Pitezel, who cares? But someone does care. The Fidelity Mutual Company, who Benjamin Pitezel's wife, has a $10,000 life insurance policy on him if he dies. So yeah, that's a lot of money. I think it's like $50,000 or $60,000, something like that. So if it is him and he didn't commit suicide or anything, we got to pay the wife $60,000. So yeah, let's make sure it's the right guy. So they call someone who is really good friends with this Benjamin Pitezel to see if he can help identify the body.
Okay.
And his name is H.H. Holmes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So he comes down to the shop to identify the body. Uh-huh. And that's where we're at right now. Let's see how Pitezel and Holmes know each other. Pitezel met Holmes in 1889, a few years ago. He needed a man to do his dirty work. All the scheming that Holmes has, all those, remember he got stuff on credit and then wouldn't pay it back. Like he needed someone to do dirty work. Mm-hmm. And this guy, Benjamin Pitezel, an alcoholic, 5 kids, out of work, was a perfect character. Now, here's the thing. This scheme I'm talking about tonight was orchestrated by both men. Holmes has done this plenty of times before. He basically gets somebody who has a wife who would have an insurance policy out on husband and convinces them, hey, let's fake your death. I'm a doctor.
I'll be the one called.
I can also provide a corpse that looks like you in some way. We can make it unrecognizable, and then we can split the money. The wife, Carrie Pitezel, was in on it as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Got it. So this is how he starts to accumulate as much money as he has, right?
Yeah.
Even though he doesn't pay a lot of people when he's building the murder castle. We've talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
He stiffs them. What?
Well, the stiff, dead body stiff.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons it's so hard to do the story, because there's a lot of parts. He is really good at doing this body swap. Not a lot of people are doing it because, number one, you have to have access to cadavers.
Right.
Or I guess you could dig it up, but you have to be knowledgeable enough to have it look like that who is dead.
Right.
I would venture to say that Holmes was probably like 1 out of 3 people in the world doing this at the time. Maybe he was the only one. He was so detailed and knowledgeable with these corpses that he could pass it off. And he's done it plenty of times.
Yeah.
It's just this one, $10,000, is kind of hefty. So they definitely want to make sure it's the right guy. Can you read from the Commonwealth versus H.H. Holmes? It says the defendant. This is kind of runs down what I just said.
The defendant and Benjamin F. Pitezel, the deceased, were engaged in a conspiracy to cheat and defraud the Fidelity Mutual Life Insurance Company of Philadelphia. In pursuance of their scheme, Pitezel obtained a policy of insurance on his life dated November 9th, 1893 for $10,000, payable to Carrie A. Pitezel, his wife. Pitezel lived in St. Louis and the defendant at Willamette, a town of 14 miles from Chicago. Pitezel left St. Louis to come to Philadelphia on July 29, 1894, rented and occupied a house number 1316 Callowhill Street, assumed the name of B.F. Perry, and held himself out as a dealer in patents.
So here's the deal. Pitezel agrees, along with his wife, to go to Philadelphia to rent this shop, what I just told you, and wait about a year. He puts up his patent shop there, and eventually they're going to find a cadaver and swap the body. Boom, boom, this guy's dead. Mm-hmm. Whatever, would take the money and then get out of Philadelphia completely.
Yep.
The thing is, at the office, H.H. Holmes was a regular shopper, a good friend. So who were they going to call to identify the body? They're going to call a close friend or family member because they got to get exact details.
Yep.
So they called H.H. Holmes, which was in on the whole scheme. So he thinks about this stuff and he knows all this stuff is going to happen. So he always puts himself in the loop. However, when you're dealing with that amount of money, Fidelity is going to have their own detectives so they don't get swindled. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The policy number was 044145, and it had been taken out of the firm's Chicago branch office. Go figure. And it said they wanted to contact any persons who knew him. Insurance companies tend to become suspicious when policyholders die within a year of taking out a huge policy. And remember, $10,000 back in there was like $60,000. So it's pretty hefty. This isn't even Pitezel. It can't be. But there's a couple things that make Pitezel kind of unstable, okay? And Holmes maybe couldn't get a cadaver that looked like him, and this guy would be perfect. Number one, he's a raging alcoholic, a huge alcoholic, and he always talks. So now you're going to give this guy $30,000 and he's always at the bar anyway, and you expect him not to blab about this whole scheme. Maybe I don't have to find a cadaver. Maybe I can kill this guy, my friend. Maybe I could use his body. But the thing is, Carrie, his wife, is in on it too.
So she's expecting she gets her husband back at the end of this.
Exactly. With the money.
Problematic.
That's what she's expecting, but...
So does Holmes then decide he needs to woo Carrie
Holmes
romantically and get her to forget about her husband?
The dead man in that building on that day was truly B.F. Pitezel. That was
B.F.
him.
Perry, a.k.a. Pitezel.
Exactly.
Okay.
The autopsy. His heart was empty and lungs congested, which means it was a quick death. So I guess if there's no blood in the heart, it's a quick explosion. I don't know. He had, quote, pigback kidneys, which was known for, that's what they called kidneys
alcoholism
has. There was 1 ounce of liquid chloroform in his stomach, and the lungs, quote, smelled of chloroform. Now, chloroform and benzene are both clear liquids. That's one of the things that the Dr. Scott noticed. Hey, this doesn't smell like benzene. It smells more like chloroform, The doctor under Fidelity Mutual, who is now pushing this case, and this guy was already buried in a pauper's grave. They had to dig him back out. Dr. Scott said that the cause of death 100% was chloroform poisoning. So what it looks like when you walk in there is this guy was lighting a pipe, boom. He didn't even light the pipe yet, but he lit the match, which makes sense. It blows up the fumes, the benzene, and it was a horrible accident. But this guy says, no, this guy died of chloroform poisoning. He had 1 ounce of it in his body. Also, in identifying the body, Eugene Smith, who found the body, has to come identify it. Yeah, that's the one I found. And when he's at the morgue doing this, a man walks in that he recognizes, H.H. Holmes. Hey, I recognize you from somewhere. I can't put my finger on it. Holmes says, I'm a patent seller. This guy, Eugene Smith, saw H.H. Holmes walk out of the shop actually on the day that he murdered Pitezel, right when he was walking downstairs. And that's how he remembered who he was. So now Holmes is caught in a lie because he's not a patent salesman. He's a doctor. But he knows this guy seen him that one day and could blow his cover.
Yep. You're going to blow the whole thing up.
Blow the whole thing.
A gruesome discovery at 1316 Callowhill Street, the Philadelphia Times, September 5th, 1892. The body of Benjamin Pitezel was discovered in a patent office at 1316 Callowhill Street. His face was badly burned, and the scene was staged to look like an accidental explosion. Objects such as the victim's tobacco-filled pipe, memo book, and broken chemical bottle were close to him. Shards of the bottle remained inside its base, not strewn about by centrifugal force, as would be expected if a blast had occurred.
So there you go. Now, Holmes, he is no longer in Philadelphia. He is just there specifically to identify this body, which he does as Pitezel because, number one, it is his body. And number two, that's his job. Now, I will say the daughter actually identified her dad as well. The daughters didn't know.
Well, it was actually him, though.
Exactly.
So, they didn't do anything wrong. They correctly identified that it was their dad.
Exactly. But here's the problem.
They don't know who's in on it and who's not.
The mother is in on it. However,
she thinks her husband's still alive.
She thinks her husband's still alive. Yes, exactly. And that's just not the case anymore. So these are 3 of the kids. He's got 5 children.
A lot of kids.
Alice on the left there is the one that identified her father by his teeth. This is where it gets a little complicated because the mother thinks that her husband is still alive, but yet the daughter is adamant that, hey, this is dad.
And the mom's like, sure, honey.
So
sure.
now, exactly.
Good girl.
So now you have a conundrum for Holmes, because none of the children knew about the scheme, and they know it's their dad lying on that slab. So the mother did know about the scheme, but she thinks her husband's alive. So now Holmes has to separate the mother and her children so they don't talk to each other.
Got it. Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
While Holmes is away waiting for the policy to come through, he got arrested for an unrelated matter, horse fraud. I'm not really sure how that happened.
Horse fraud. Wow. I didn't know that was a thing. Like, do you think he was like, I'm selling you a stallion that's 16 hands and it was really only 14 hands?
I don't know, maybe. Do you know how to tell if a horse is sick? If his voice sounds a little hoarse.
Good job. Oh, goodness.
Oh, excuse me. Let me back up a second. Before Holmes and Pitezel discussed this arrangement of this fraud, Holmes was arrested for horse fraud. And this is important because when he was in prison, there was another man who was pretty famous at the time as being what do you call him? Like Billy the Kid, not a cowboy. What do you call him?
An outlaw?
An outlaw. There you go. There was a famous outlaw, Marion Hedgepeth. He's not really known to us, but apparently he was a great bank robber. But he was serving time in there. And Holmes was a fan, as were a lot of people that saw Hedgepeth's name in the newspapers. So before the whole Pitezel, before they even set up this thing, Holmes visited this guy in his cell and said, hey, I do a little bit of scamming myself. I'm a doctor. I can get corpses. I'm thinking about doing this job where we substitute a body for $10,000 for $10,000 in life insurance. So he now told this outlaw his plan.
Okay.
All right. This outlaw, the reason he told him that is because he also asked, do you know a crooked lawyer? And that's when he provided him with a crooked lawyer who was also in on the scheme, because you have to have a crooked lawyer in there.
Obviously.
So before all this happened, he now told an outlaw he got a recommendation for a lawyer, which they used, and Holmes had promised this outlaw a cut for the recommendation.
Now he's offering. Now this is getting split even more.
I know.
I have a feeling he's taking back the Pitezel's portion of the pie. Is he going to figure out a way to stiff?
No, because
Carrie?
he can't. Because if he takes that portion, then what about the wife who thinks her husband's alive?
I was thinking he was just gonna say he ran away. Like, peace, lady. I don't know.
This guy, Marion Hedgepeth, the outlaw, he's expecting his cut. And when he finds out about this,
he's not gonna be happy if he gets stiffed.
He is still in prison, and he says, hey, wait a minute. I know who did this, and I didn't get any money from it.
Oh.
So not only can I write a confession to the Fidelity Mutual Company or whatever insurance company he frauded, which was Fidelity, not only can I do that and say what I know, I can also provide details that are not in the paper, and I can provide details that no one else would know unless I'm telling the truth. So now Holmes is being looked at for not just insurance fraud, but for murder, right? Because who the fuck is this?
Right.
Dead on the floor.
Right.
All right. At this point, Holmes is in a bind, because if the kids tell mommy that that's daddy on the slab, then his whole plan goes to shit. So he has to separate the kids, these 3 kids, from mom for several weeks until this whole thing blows over. He goes to Carrie and tells Carrie that her husband is alive but hiding in London. Then he convinces her to let him take the 3 children, the 3 oldest children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, and travel with them to London to be reunited with their father, who is hiding out until the insurance claim pays.
Oh boy.
But now you see another layer added on, because what's he going to do?
He's about to kill those 3 kids. Is he not?
I don't know. At this point, and this is how detailed this guy is, and I don't think anyone could pull this off, but he not only traveled with the 3 children all through northeastern United States, Canada, and all along the country, okay, doing his thing. Going to London, to meet the dad, right? He also simultaneously escorted the mother in a parallel route at the same time. So he would book a hotel for him and the kids. He told Carrie, the mother, that he's booking her a hotel room too, so she can go to London, make little stops until she gets to London. Not knowing that her kids and Holmes is right there in the next hotel over doing this, because he's going to off all of them, but he's just got to wait to get to a good spot. So he is doing this. It's too much, right? Holy shit. All right.
Wow.
Okay. The Fidelity Insurance Company wants their money, and not, because this was a murder. Yeah, the guy's dead and had an insurance policy on himself, but he was in the scheme. We ain't paying anything. But then you have this guy, a detective, Frank Geyer, who's like, whoa, when they finally arrested Holmes. Okay, we got Holmes. All right. We got Carrie arrested. Where are the kids? You were traveling with 3 kids to meet Pitezel in London, but Pitezel was dead on the floor in Philadelphia. What happened to the kids? So that's what we're going to talk about in the next episode.
And also, how does he get out of this to then go to Chicago and do all more murders? That's I think even more puzzling to me. How the fuck does he get out of this?
I don't know, man. I guess you gotta stay tuned, I guess.
All right, part 3, everybody.
No, part 4. This was part 3. Oh, yeah. This is what Holmes says in one of his many confessions when he was caught, December 27th, 1894. If you want to read, he starts off with, "I regret that I have made false statements in the past, but the following are the facts."
While Pitezel was at 1316 Callow Hill Street, he drank very heavily, and I took him to task about it. He appeared to be despondent and said that he had better drink enough to kill himself, or have done with it all. The next morning I visited his place, and using a key I entered the building. I found a letter addressed to me, which I destroyed, in which he said I would find his body upstairs. I went upstairs and found him lying dead on the floor. There was a rubber tube in his mouth which was attached to a quill run through a cork in a large bottle containing chloroform. I had arranged with Pitezel that the body be substituted for his should be burned, about the face and hands by pouring a mixture of benzene, chloroform, and ammonia on it, and then setting it on fire. That a large bottle was to be broken and a smoking pipe and burned match placed nearby, the object being to show that the person supposed to be Pitezel or Perry had actually ignited the mixture in the bottle while lighting the pipe, and that the bottle exploded and the death was caused by the burns. Seeing Pitezel's body, I decided to carry out this plan in all its details.
So this is not his first confession, but now he's saying, you know what?
He's leaning into it.
I did do this. I didn't kill the guy. The guy has been talking about suicide for weeks. Plus, he's a drunk. So I just go and visit him. I see the body, and this guy's offed himself, which means his wife is not going to get the insurance. So I'm a good guy. I staged it like an explosion. So at least his wife will get the money. You see how you see how he does it?
I see it.
And this is, it's like, it's a lot, for him. Here's another one. When they didn't know yet 100% that it was Pitezel on the slab, he said, quote, "The last time I saw Pitezel," he said, "was in Detroit, Michigan. There I gave him to Miss Williams, Holmes, and who took him to Buffalo, New York, from which point she proceeded to Niagara Falls. After the departure of Pitezel in Mrs. Williams' care," Mrs. Williams, as we'll get to, is also a victim here. She dead. So it just makes sense that both of them go on vacation together, apparently, because they're both dead. All right. "I took Alice and Nellie to Toronto, Canada, where they remained for several days. At Toronto, I purchased railroad tickets for them for Niagara Falls, put them on the train, and rode out Toronto with them a few miles so that they would be assured that they were on the right train. Before their departure, I prepared a telegram which they should send me from the falls if they failed to meet Mrs. Williams and her husband, and also carefully pinned in the dress address of Alice $400 in large bills so Mrs. Williams would be in funds to defray their expenses. So he's saying, no. So, okay, one confession is he's on the floor, committed suicide, and you staged his body. The other confession is you saw him in Niagara Falls on a train? What? Like, how can you believe anything this guy says?
You can't.
Right?
You cannot. You should not.
But anyway, that was the murder of Pitezel. That was his body in there, and that is ultimately going to be what gets him caught. Not specifically not specifically him, Pitezel, but the ruthlessness and fearlessness of the detective, who was more concerned about these damn kids. Where the fuck are these kids? And that's when they're going to really open it into Holmes, and that's when they're going to find the murder castle stuff. Yeah. So we're going to cover that next. The kids, how they ended up and where they ended up. And it's pretty bad what he did to them. But we got to cover that, and then we'll be in the murder castle, I promise. Jesus Christ.
All right.
So by 2026, we're going to have this thing done, man. All right, we'll be back tomorrow. So thanks for being here with us, and good night, you lovely, lovely people.
Kind of run this shit.